Okay, so this is an iMovie project centered around America's first debate over whether or not to ratify the Constitution, and it was between the Federalists and the Antifederalists. In May 1787, 55 delegates representing every state except Rhode Island gathered at the Philadelphia State House with the goal of amending the Articles of Confederation. Within the first couple of days, they realized this was futile and decided to start from scratch by composing a completely new, different type of government. The new system of government was around the ideology and the concept of federalism. Federalism is a type of government where you have a divided amount of power between the state and federal level. The delegates in Philadelphia spent a total of 4 months drafting and revising the Constitution. When they released the results, many Americans were completely shocked at how much had been changed. How do you think you would feel if all of a sudden the 55 rich guys went into a room for 4 months and then came out and had a new government for you to obey? Immediately following the composition of the Constitution, two different factions emerged: the Federalists, who supported the Constitution, and the Antifederalists, who opposed the Constitution. And this laid the groundwork for America's first major political debate. The opponents of the Constitution were called the Antifederalists. They believed the Constitution and a strong federal government would take away from the rights and privileges of the states, as well as infringe upon the individual liberties of the people. Notable Anti-Federalists included Samuel Adams, Patrick Henry, Robert Yates, and the anonymous Brutus. The Anti-Federalists were generally advocates of states' rights, backcountry farmers, the ill-educated, the illiterate, and slave owners, and they believed the Constitution was deleterious to the people and the country in many ways. Anti-Federalists' primary objections to the Constitution were as follows. First, it had no Bill of Rights. They believed that without a Bill of Rights, the people's individual liberties would be gravely endangered. Second, they believed that state and smaller governments could better address the needs of their people than a federal government ever could. Third, they believed the Supreme Court would turn into a despotic branch of government that would enforce its will on the other two branches of government as well as the people without any checks or balances. Fourth, they opposed a standing army. They opposed the National Army. They believed that since this is what Great Britain did to enforce its will upon the United States or the colonies, that a federal government would do the same thing with the states and the people. And finally, they believed that the Electoral College and the system of representation under the Constitution was elitist and unfair to the average person. Supporters of the Constitution were called the Federalists. They supported a strong national government, a unified country, and a division of power between the state and federal governments. In 1787, the country was massively in debt. Economies were a mess, states were not getting along, there was no army, no means of taxation, and no regulation on trade. Strengthening the federal government was an absolute necessity, and state governments needed to be checked and monitored. The Federalists supported strengthening the federal government and the Constitution. Notable Federalists included James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and George Washington. The Federalists were able to counter the Anti-Federalist arguments. They argued that a Bill of Rights was unnecessary, a standing army was vital for the defense and security of the country, checks and balances were able to ensure fairness, and that a unified country was a better country, and that would strengthen the economy and strengthen the country as a whole. In the end, the Federalists got their way and the Constitution was ratified. However, there was a compromise. And that compromise took the form of the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution, the Bill of Rights. The Anti-Federalists got their Bill of Rights and secured individual liberties. The Federalists got their form of government, and in the end, both sides were happy. The Constitution was ratified in June of 1788, and George Washington famously said to one of his friends, "We'll be lucky if this thing lasts 20 years.